Hiya, I'm Bruce Fummey. When you think of Scottish history, you probably think of Bonnie Prince Charlie, Robert the Bruce, Mary Queen of Scots. But if I asked you who was the last Celtic King of Scots, what name would you give me? If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then hit the subscribe button at the bottom right hand side of the screen at any time and ring the notification bell to find out when I publish new videos. In the meantime, let me tell you a Celtic story. So who was the last Celtic King of Scots? Now, whatever name comes into your head right now, can you tell me in the comments section below? And don't worry, it's not a trap, there's no judgment, I just really like to know what people think. My guess is that few, if any, will choose the name that I've got in my head right now. But he belonged to a family and a tumultuous period that changed Scotland forever. Now, the weather forecast for the next few days is such that we are not supposed to move about, and that's why I'm in my dining room. In an ideal world, I would have taken you to Dunsinane Hill, where Shakespeare placed the death of MacBeth, or Lunfannon, where it actually happened. Now, I made a video where I suggested that MacBeth was the last Celtic King of Scots. Now, obviously, if it was as simple as that, then this would be a pretty short video. Now, I wasn't out to deceive you. I'll leave a link below to Fiona Watson's fantastic book, MacBeth, A True Story. In the meantime, let me explain. In a dodgy Shakespeare play, they said that MacBeth killed a guy called King Duncan. And that's fair enough, I accept that. It also says in that play that when Duncan was killed, his two sons fled. Malcolm south to England and his younger brother Donald Ban fled to Ireland. Now, I'm reasonably okay with that as well, but the play has them as adult warriors. In fact, Malcolm was 9 and Donald was 7. MacBeth would have settled down in the Strathern Valley. It's not far from me. See my video about the history of Scotland's birth. There'll be a link at the end. But from the age of 9, Malcolm grew up not in Celtic Scotland, but in Saxon England. It was with Saxon troops that he came back to Scotland 14 years later to overthrow the Celtic king MacBeth and defeat him at the Battle of Dunsinane Hill. It was with more Saxon troops that he returned and killed MacBeth at Lunfannon 3 years later. Now, Malcolm Canmore was now the King of Scots. But was he the last Celtic King of Scots? He does have a claim to be the last Celtic King of Scots. He'd been born in Scotland to a Celtic father, Duncan. Actually, Duncan's the anglicised name of a Shakespeare play. In Gaelic, he would have been called Donoghu. Malcolm married twice. His first wife was Norse. They had 3 boys. The eldest was named Donoghu, after his granddad. We'll come back to him. Malcolm's second wife was the Saxon Princess Margaret. Now, you might know her as Saint Margaret. She fled north with her brother when William the Conqueror invaded England in 1066. The chapel that's at the top at Edinburgh Castle, that's dedicated to her if you've ever been there. They had 8 children, so maybe she wasn't quite as saintly as you might think. They gave the first few Saxon names. They probably still had hope of a Saxon revival to put their children back on the English throne. The later children got Norman names, and Malcolm and Margaret made their base in Dunfermline, just a little bit closer to those Saxon territories. So Malcolm Canmore had been born in Celtic Scotland but grown up in Saxon England, married a Saxon and given their children Saxon and then Norman names. Mind you, he died in a typically Celtic way, raiding and pillaging the north of England. When Malcolm died, his brother took the throne. And remember, the one that had fled at the same time from MacBeth, right? Donald Ban, Donald III of Scotland. So was Donald III the last Celtic King of Scots? Well, when MacBeth killed their dad and Malcolm fled south, Donald seems to have been taken to Ireland. So he may not have been brought up in Celtic Scotland, but Celtic Ireland surely has got to be the next best thing. But was he the last Celtic King of Scots? What happened to Malcolm's children, I hear you ask? Well, they fled to England. Now, there's competing stories about the extent to which they jumped or were pushed, but they obviously felt safer growing up at the English court than with Uncle Donald in the Scottish one. But some of Malcolm Canmore's kids in England thought that they should be King of Scots. In 1094, Donogh, the eldest, remember him? He came north. Now Donogh is an interesting character. Born in Scotland with a Celtic name, he'd been down south way longer than his brothers and sisters. You see, when William of Normandy, William the Conqueror, took over England, Malcolm kept up the cross-border raiding. Eventually, William came north to a place called Abernethy and made Malcolm swear an oath to behave himself. But just in case Malcolm's oath swearing wasn't enough, he wanted a hostage. Now imagine you're lined up with your brothers and sisters and your dad says, "I swear on my son's life." And William the Conqueror says, "Oh aye, which one?" And dad points at you and says, "That one." Oh, what must have been like as a wee laddie to have to wave goodbye to your dad knowing that he was a lying, thieving, cattle raiding git and head off to England to guarantee his good behaviour? Worse still, to then find out that he'd kept on raiding. Oh no, squeaky bum time. Now Donogh wasn't killed. He was much too valuable. He was raised in the Norman court, taught Norman ways, and on the death of William the Conqueror, knighted as a Norman. By the time he came north to overthrow his uncle Donald Ban, sent by the Norman English king with a Norman English army led by his Saxon uncle Edgar, the Celtic Donogh wasn't nearly as Celtic as the wee boy who had left. I wonder if he saw himself as a Celtic king. The Scots certainly didn't. They must have looked back wistfully to MacBeth, and then Malcolm Canmore had turned towards the Saxon English. Uncle Donald brought the good old Celtic times back, and now Donald had been deposed, and here was Duncan the Norman. Mere English than his father. The Scots rose up against him with enough force to impose their demands. He could remain king, but he had to send his Norman knights and entourage back south. Reluctantly, Duncan saw that his position was weak, so he sent his English men at arms south. And a Scotsman stabbed him. "Are you mental, Duncan? What did you think was going to happen? Oh aye, send your Norman protectors home and everything will be hunky-dory. What could possibly go wrong? It's a good job Uncle Donald had been waiting in the wings for another go, eh?" Welcome back, Donald III. Often in the stories that I tell, geopolitical conflicts can really be reduced down to a family power struggle. Here's one where it seems to me that family power struggle really masks a wider conflict between Celtic and Anglo-Norman cultures. With Uncle Donald back, the Celts had reasserted themselves, at least for a while. So there was an ongoing tussle for the Scottish throne between the sons of Malcolm Canmore, coming up here with their southern ways, and their uncle Donald, who represented tradition. Now, you're about to hear a list of names. Don't worry, they're basically the Canmore boys in order of age. The next of Malcolm Canmore's lads to arrive with English support didn't even have the veneer of a Celtic name. This time it was Edgar. Now, a chart at the time sees him possessing the whole land of Lothian and the kingship of Scots by the gift of my Lord William, King of the English. Aye, possessing the whole land of Lothian maybe, but north of the Forth, they know what you're up to. And the tussle between Celtic and Saxon Scotland continued. When he died in suspicious, or at the very least uncertain circumstances, he was followed by his brother Alexander. This time, the Canmore boys didn't make the mistake of leaving Uncle Donald healthy and waiting in the wings. Uncle Donald's eyes were put out, and he was dumped in a deep, dark dungeon to be forgotten about. Now, when Alexander died without children, he was replaced by his younger brother David. David was even more Norman than his elder brothers. Born with a Norman name, brought up in the Norman court, he brought Norman knights to Scotland with him. Bruces, Wallaces, Cummins. You get the picture. David I, the last of Malcolm Canmore's sons, completed the transformation from Celtic to Saxon to Norman. They say that it had been young David's idea to put his uncle's eyes out in the first place, so that Donald III, the man who I'm going to suggest was the last Celtic king of Scots, died a blind man in a dark dungeon, forgotten. Until now. Anyway, there's a cheery thought to end on. A choice of viewing now. If you want more about David I, click this video here. If you'd rather find out more about the time and place of Scotland's birth, then choose this video here. In the meantime, ha mi docus gwn be la ma alive. Cheery and drasta.